About growing and caring for raspberries today. I do have these publications for you to look at back there on one of the displays. OSU has some really, really well done publications on growing berries in the Pacific Northwest, growing raspberries in particular. And you will notice that one of these publications does say growing berries on the Oregon coast, but the information in there still is applicable to the Willamette Valley. All right, here are some things that I hope you learned from this presentation. I hope you'll be able to choose the variety that you prefer, that you'll become acquainted with some of the terminology that I'm going to give you. You'll learn about some of the planting techniques and soil improvement, the proper care like fertilizing, watering, and pruning, and be aware of some of the possible pests that you may have and some solutions to them. Okay, we're going to start. You're going to have to start at the beginning. You're going to have to figure out where you're going to put these raspberries. These raspberries are going to live for a long time, 15 to 18 years, even longer maybe. So you're going to want them in a spot where you know they're going to stay for a very long time. Drainage is one of the very most important things that you need to think about when you're talking about planting raspberries. They get root rot very easily, so drainage is going to be a big factor. Locate these raspberries where you can control the suckers. Raspberries are not well behaved at all. They have suckers that come up everywhere. The good thing about it is these suckers are called Primocanes, and these are going to be your next year's, where they're going to have your berries for the next year. But trust me, these suckers are going to come up everywhere. If you think you're going to put I'm going to say blueberries a lot today, sorry about that. If you're going to put your raspberries on your and your neighbor's area, right next to your neighbors, think twice about that, because you're going to end up with your raspberries in their lawn and they're not going to be very happy. So think about where you're going to put it. Also, try to avoid a spot. If you've had tomatoes or peppers or strawberries or eggplants or other types of caneberries in that area within the past 3 years, that's not a very good spot to put your raspberries in, because all of these plants get the same types of diseases and insect problems. You don't want to start out with that problem when you put the raspberries in, because they're going to be very long-lived. Try to plan 6 months to a year in advance, and I know how hard that is. We're gardeners. We go to the nursery, we see these beautiful raspberry plants. You know, I've always wanted to plant raspberries. You buy them, you take them home, and you stick them in the ground. You're going to have a lot of trouble. So try to plan ahead of time. So you've got your site figured out. Now you're going to get the soil ready. Eliminate all the perennial weeds. You don't want to start out with problems. So try to get rid of all the weeds that you can in that area. Check the pH. How many of you brought pH? Or it's your soil for pH testing? Good. How many of you brought soil to test your raspberry area? A couple of you. Okay, good for you. Hope it works out for you. All right, you're going to mix in some organic matter. I can't exactly tell you how much. It depends on what your soil's like, but those publications that I talked about have a lot of information about that, and so does the handout that you have. If you can put your raspberries on a raised bed, it doesn't have to be necessarily a complete raised bed, but it could just be a raised mound. You'll have a lot less problems with your raspberries because they don't like having their feet wet, and putting them on a mound will help the drainage. You're going to have to build a trellis. Okay, you've got the ground already. You're going to have to put a trellis up before you plant your raspberries. Whatever type of trellis you decide depends on your preference and how your area is. Probably the most common type is a T trellis with wires going down both sides so that the raspberries can grow up and they can either be tied to the wire or they can be held in between the wires. But most of the raspberries that you're going to plant are going to need some type of support. There's a lot of information out there from the universities on different types of trellises, how high to build them. So you can look up that information and find out what you need. All right, here's a little bit of terminology. When you first plant your raspberry plant and they start growing, those are called primocanes. Those are called primocanes because they are not going to produce fruit or flowers or fruit. Then the next year, as those grow up, the next summer, we're going to call them floricanes. It's the same plant, but now it's going to produce flowers and it's going to produce fruit, so we just changed its name. We changed it to a floricane. I'm going to really confuse you pretty soon. Then on these floricanes, you will get laterals that grow out. And on these lateral branches that grow out, that's where your berries are going to be produced. Now, each berry has what we call, all those little bumps you see on your raspberries is called a druplet, and inside every druplet is a seed. Okay, we're going to start with the Floricane-Fruiting raspberries. Most of us we know the more common name, summer-bearing raspberries. But I will tell you that a lot of the new publications don't call them summer-bearing anymore. They call them Floricane-Fruiting raspberries. If you grow Floricane-Fruiting raspberries, you will get your main crop around mid-June, but you won't get it until the second summer after you planted it. If you were to plant raspberries, if your ground was ready for your raspberries, if you were to plant them right now, you would not get your first crop until the summer of 2021. So it takes a year before they turn into floricanes. Okay? If they're really happy, you should get about 25 pounds of berries in a 10-foot row. And they won't all come on at one time. Those of you that have raspberries know that. You should be having raspberries on your vines between 30 and 40 days. You'll be able to be picking those raspberries. And like I mentioned, they live for a long time, 15, 18 years or even more. I know some master gardeners that have had theirs for up to 30 years because they were in a really good spot and they were very healthy raspberry plants. Now remember, the suckers that come up are next year's crop. Okay? Those are the ones that we call Primocanes. Now the Primocane, we have another type, Primocane-Fruiting. Now didn't I just tell you that they don't fruit on Primocanes? Well, they do, kind of. They do fruit on Primocane-Fruiting. We're used to them being called Everbearers or Fall Bearers, but like I said, the universities now are calling them Primocane-Fruited. So they probably won't have as large a yield as your summer bearers will. And they will produce either 2 crops a year or 1 crop a year, depending on how you prune them. And I will talk about that in a little bit. There are also black raspberries out there, which we call Blackcaps. How many of you have Blackcaps? 1, okay. They're not as popular for home gardeners now. Either you really like them or you don't really like them. They're very seedy, but they make great jelly, don't they? Yes, they do. And they require a lot different pruning than our normal red raspberries. They are more of a bush shape instead of a vine. There are also purple raspberries out there, which are a cross between a blackcap and a red raspberry. Okay, so now we're ready to figure out which raspberries you want to grow, whether you're going to grow Floricanes or Primocanes. And this publication, Growing Raspberry Cultivars for the Pacific Northwest, has lists and lists of raspberries for our area. And it will tell you specific things like how large the berries get, how disease resistant they get, whether they're Floricanes, whether they're Primocanes. All that information is in here. So you can figure out what you want. Here are some of the Floricane-Fruiting raspberries that we have. Cascade Bounty and Cascade Delight are some newly developed ones. And one of them is actually resistant to root rot and the other one is semi-resistant to root rot. Meeker and Willamette, some of you that have raspberries may have one of these if you've had your raspberries for a long time. These are old varieties. They're pretty susceptible to a lot of diseases, but they are very, very tasty, so that's why a lot of people have these. If you are going to grow Primocane-Fruiting raspberries, you have your choice between red or yellow. So a lot of people grow a row of summer-bearing red raspberries, and then they grow a row of yellow-bearing Primocane-Fruiting raspberries in the fall. All right, you've got everything ready. You went to the nursery, you got your raspberries, and now you're ready to put them in the ground. Please do purchase disease-free, certified disease-free raspberries. I know your cousin may have some really good raspberries, and they have a lot of suckers coming up, and they may say, hey, just take them to your house. But trust me, if there's any kind of disease or insect problems on their raspberries, and you take it to your house, you're going to have that problem too. So you want to start out with a really good raspberry. So go to the nurseries, a reputable nursery or farm store, and buy a certified disease-free, usually bare root. They'll start coming into the stores around January or February, and you want to plant them as early in spring as your garden can be worked, your garden area. You're going to spread the roots out in a shallow hole, and the way you're going to plant them is where the root and the stem meet, you're going to put it 2 inches down below that. So the cane of your raspberry is going to go 2 inches into the ground below where the roots meet it. Then you're going to cover it up, water the soil, and then you're going to cut the canes at, cut the canes at 6 inches. Cut them down. They're going to flower, they're going to send up leaves all summer long, but you're going to want to cut them down. Sometimes when you buy them at the nurseries, they might only be 6 inches tall to begin with. Sometimes they may be a little bit taller. Okay, now comes the confusing part, pruning. It might not be too confusing, except that we're going to talk about Floricane and Primocane-Fruiting. So for your Floricane-Fruiting raspberries, remember, you plant them this year, you're not going to get the first crop until next summer. So after the first crop is done, you're going to cut those canes down. Now remember, while your berries are coming on, you're going to be having a lot more coming up. Remember, those Primocanes are going to be growing all summer long. So during the summer, you're going to have a mix of fruiting ones and non-fruiting ones. But trust me, when they're done fruiting, you know it. They don't look good anymore. You'll know which ones they are. So those you can cut down and leave those nice new suckering Primocanes there to come up. Okay? In the wintertime, check them out. Go out into your area and check them out. If there's any real weak ones, broken ones, diseased ones, cut those out so that you can have a really good start when the season begins again. And then you're going to do is you're going to shorten them. You're going to cut them down to 6 feet tall. When you tip them at 6 feet, that causes more laterals to grow underneath. And the laterals is what produce the fruit. So that was pretty easy, right? Okay, Primocane-Fruiting. Now you got your choice. How many of you have Primocane-Fruiting raspberries? Okay, a few of you, quite a few of you. Good for you. You can either have 1 crop or you can have 2 crops. So if you want to have 2 crops of Primocane-Fruiting raspberries, what you got to remember is if you planted your Primocanes right now, those Primocanes are going to grow up and they are going to produce their first crop, a small crop, but their first crop in the fall, the end of August or September. That's crop number 1. And then their next crop is going to be the following summer. So actually, if you wanted raspberries this year, Primocane-Fruiting ones would give you a small crop in the fall. So in the wintertime, say your raspberries grew up, they fruited. They fruit on the tips in the fall, just on the tips. So in the wintertime, cut those tips off. Cut all the dead parts off. Then the next summer, they're going to fruit in the middle again. Not on the tip this time, they're going to fruit in the middle. And when they're done fruiting in the middle, they're going to be dead. Cut them all the way down to the ground. Okay? Does that make sense? I hope so. Now here's an easy one. What if you just want 1 crop, 1 fall crop? Like I said, I know a lot of people that'll have 1 row of summer-bearing raspberries and then 1 row of Primocane that they only have 1 crop. They have a large crop in the summertime and a larger crop in the fall. So what you do is in late winter, cut them down to the ground. Just cut them down right to the crown. They will grow up all summer long. They will produce a big crop in the fall. And when that's done, cut them down. And they'll do the same thing again. Very easy way to get just 1 crop and a nice fall crop. Okay, if you're going to fertilize your raspberries, do some type of well-balanced fertilizer, meaning it needs to have nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. You can use a synthetic, like a 1616, or if you're going to use organic, something similar to cottonseed meal would be a good one. I can't go into detail. It'd be too hard to go into detail because depending on how old your raspberries are, they have different needs as far as the amount of fertilizer. But what you can do is the publications that are back there, and I think there's some information on your handout that will give you a little bit more information about exactly how much fertilizer to put on your raspberries. The one thing that I do want you to know is that your new plantings, when you first plant them, the timing of those fertilizers is going to be different than your established plants. The timing of what months you fertilize is going to be different. So that's just something I want you to be aware of when you start to think about fertilizing. All right, I did mention that the worst problem with raspberry is root rot. And Phytophthora root rot is one of the big ones that we have a problem with. And what happens is your raspberries are growing up beautiful, and they're just getting ready to put on those great red berries, and all of a sudden the plants start to die. And that's because the roots underneath are dead. The Phytophthora root rot has gotten into those roots, and the roots cannot take up water. A lot of people see these dead plants and think, oh, not enough water, I'm going to water them more. It's not going to help because the roots can't take up that water. But you know what happens at that time? The same time that your fruiting raspberries are looking really bad, those new primocanes are coming up from the ground. And they look so nice and green, you think, okay, next year I'm going to have a great crop. It's not going to work that way. The little ones that are coming up, it doesn't take much to get them to grow because they're not trying to produce fruit, so they're looking pretty good. But next summer, when they're trying to fruit and all that energy, they need a lot of energy, it's not going to work. So if you see them dying and you know that you have Phytophthora root rot, it's time to take them out, get some new plants, and put them someplace else and not in that area. There are resistant cultivars. Remember I talked about Cascade Bounty. If you can find that, it is resistant to root rot. Also, make sure that you have your soil well drained and mounding it up. 90%, you will stop Phytophthora root rot by 90% if you can build your raspberries on a mound that's 1.5 to 2 feet tall. That's pretty good chance there. Botrytis might be another problem that you have heard about. We call it gray mold. You know, we see this a lot on our berries, and that's just caused from a moist, humid environment. If the bushes stay wet for a long period of time, that's what's going to cause this botrytis. So that could be caused from rain, fog, heavy dew. If you water too late in the day and the water stays on those plants, that can cause the botrytis fungus to multiply. The other thing that will cause it is it will overwinter on weeds. That's why you need to try to keep your area clean and free of weeds so that you don't get this problem. The biggest problem you're going to have with an insect is the spotted-winged Drosophila. How many of you have heard of the spotted-winged Drosophila? Yeah, probably about half of you. It's a fruit fly. The fruit fly, she lays her eggs inside of the fruit on your vine as it is ripening. And then when the egg hatches out, the larva that's inside of your fruit will start eating it. And it'll be all mushy. Your fruit will be mushy and not edible at all. The traps for these guys are apple cider vinegar traps, and there's one in the back that you can look at and some information on how to build these traps in case you have this problem. And it won't be just on your raspberries. Any soft fruit or berries can have this problem. Another problem some people have with their raspberries is called the crown moth borer. Even though this guy looks like a yellow jacket, it's actually a clear-winged moth. And its larva will be chewing down at the bottom of your raspberry, and it'll chew into the canes, and then your whole cane will die. So if this happens, you're going to have to dig out that cane, dig out as much of the crown as you can, and hopefully destroy it so that you won't have that problem. Also, they say to remove your host plants, such as wild blackberries. Yeah, that's never going to happen. So just keep an eye on your raspberries. Okay, like I mentioned, OSU has a lot of really good publications, a lot more information on them than I was able to give you today. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to get online. You can download these free, or you can come to the office and we will be glad to give you one. So thanks for coming and listening.